Lucky Ride. Written by Deborah Coonts. Narrated by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. Are you my mother? The girl standing in front of my desk could have been me half a lifetime ago. Fresh-faced, a bit pale, and scared. She was tall to the point her shoulders stooped in teenage mortification. Her jeans had that designer distressed look, but without the designer price. A hard life, hard-earned. I pegged her at 15 or a young 16. The raw scrape on her forehead, overlying a blooming bruise, made her look older. With trouble written all over her, she needed a hug, but I didn't think that was what she was looking for, although I'd willingly comply. Something about tired children wandering into my office in the deepest, darkest part of the night hit every raw nerve of righteous indignation I had. With that opening line and her straight man delivery, I was sure she was kidding, so I kept my tone light. You could do far better than me. I thought maybe I'd get a hint of a smile or something. I was wrong. Dead serious stared back at me. Okay, I'll play it straight, but that's not a question I'm used to getting in the middle of the night. Well, not ever. First time, really. But as an opener, it's a killer. I refocused on my preparations to leave after a very long day. Home called. Actually, a bed and a hot French chef called, and I had no strength left to resist. Not a question I use on everybody. The girl monotoned it, her expression serious to the point of pinched pain. The idea was ludicrous, so I gave serious its due. Your mother. Me? Each word laden with sarcasm. I hope she got my point. She wasn't so much barking up the wrong tree as in the wrong forest altogether. Heck, I wasn't even close to abandoning my childish ways. And that whole maternal thing? Not even a tick-tock of the biological clock. No one who knew me would use parental as an adjective to describe me unless they were going for a cheap laugh. Thankfully, I kept those shortcomings to myself. Running on fumes, with a short fuse and a penchant for semi-mixing metaphors when tired, I considered my silence an epic win. The girl looked hungry and scared. Been there myself, I knew the signs. If she wanted a meal and a soft bed, all she had to do was give me a hint. To her, asking for it would be impossible. I knew that too. Her strong voice and the tilt to her chin were straight out of my playbook under the chapter Offense is the Best Defense, which made me feel a kinship. Though had she asked, I could have told her it was rarely the best approach, except when dealing with my mother, Mona. Mona was the exception to every rule. I weighed how to handle the young woman in front of me. She seemed determined to make me work for what she wanted. Not the way to my soft underbelly, but her waifish act was clanging every rescuer bell I had, which always got me into trouble. What can I say? I'm my mother's daughter, but don't ever expect me to admit it, like out loud or anything. When I'd finally admitted it to myself, I felt like leaping from a tall building. If I had to admit it to someone else, I'd take a running start. With a sigh, I leaned back in my desk chair and gave her my full attention. I would have remembered had I had a child. I'm sorry. She absorbed that without a flinch. Doesn't mean you wouldn't lie about it. She tilted her chin higher. That rankled. It shouldn't. She didn't know me. Clearly this wasn't about me, it was about her. But her insinuation felt personal. I squeezed my eyes shut, reaching for perspective and my ever-elusive self-control. I opened my eyes. She hadn't disappeared. A decent person wouldn't lie about a thing like that. She gave a snort. Right. Don't know any of those decent types. She looked me over. You one? Most days. Or I'd like to think so, at least. Decency was a dying art, along with civility. I owed her both. My name is Lucky O'Toole, and as the Vice President of Customer Relations for the Babylon Group, the holding company for a couple of major Vegas Strip properties, as well as satellite properties as close as downtown Vegas and as far away as Macau, solving problems was not only the beating heart of my being, but also of my job. The girl clearly had a problem. But perhaps I'm a bit delusional, and decency eludes me. Anyway, you came here for a reason. Want to tell me about it? Curiosity had a bad rap, but I wasn't a cat, so it probably wouldn't be lethal. Yes, she had me at the mother line, I admit it. You do know I'm not your mother, right? Why did I need her to believe me? There was something about her. You want to tell me why you're here? She met my eyes for a moment, then stared at the ground as if wishing a hole would open and swallow her. A hint of pink rose in her cheeks. No. She shifted as if moving the load that rested on her shoulders. I mean, yes, I want to tell you about it, but no, I know you're not my mother. Sometimes you just want something so bad. As her voice hitched, she looked at me through two big eyes. Then she shook her head, as if shaking away a dream. I knew all about that, too. She dropped the combative posture, but retained the attitude. A teenager to the core. Maybe you're not my mother, but you know her. A different tack, a broader gene pool. I know a lot of people. Even some who would abandon a kid. Not something that gave me a warm fuzzy. They say you were the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. That didn't give me a warm fuzzy either. Vegas was full of folks who would do the less than honorable things for honorable reasons. Or less than honorable reasons. And the trick was figuring out who would do which. My job description included rubbing shoulders with both types, all day, every day. This being Vegas, where the game was paramount and winning essential. I probably handled more of the less than honorable types than the other, although I didn't keep score. Some of their situational ethics were bound to rub off and damage my delicate psyche. Would that be a workplace injury? As I pondered the limits of workers' comp, I motioned to a chair in front of the desk. Why don't you sit? She ignored me. A kid, alone, in need of a good meal, or several, and desperate enough to play the mother card. She was so not what I needed. Not now, not today. A very young New Year's Day, but growing older by the second. Jet-lagged and overamped from chasing a couple of killers in China. Still reeling from too much birthday. A hotel, my own for once, so new, and a punch list so long. All of it made me feel like moving and not leaving a forwarding address. So I wasn't in the market for another problem. Another dose of the downside of life. But she was what I got. What's your mother's name? The kid pulled her shoulders back and stood tall. I don't know. You don't know? Of course she didn't. At an impasse, I stared at her, cataloging our situation. Well, actually, my situation. Of all the places she could have gone to for help, she wandered far to find me. Why me? And here in my new office, I wasn't easy to find. The space still looked Spartan. I'd yet to put my personal stamp on it. What was that about? Truth be told, while I reveled in having my own hotel, Cielo, I missed my old office in the Babylon. I missed my staff, my chosen family. Hell, I even missed my foul-mouthed bird, Newton. Well, okay, the bird not so much. Such is change. Something lost for something gained. Sometimes I wondered if it was worth the price. Nervousness roiled my stomach as my question lingered. Why me? I think you know more than you're telling me. Otherwise, why would you work so hard to find me? She looked so heartbroken, I took the sting out of my tone. Stories and dreams are dangerous things. Once you let them out, they aren't yours alone anymore, I said, apropos of everything. I get that, but you've got to give me something if you want me to help you. My words jarred something loose inside her. Her face cleared as she pulled out one fist that had been stuffed in a pocket. In her hand, she clutched a scrap of paper, which she thrust at me. I'm telling you the truth. I don't know my mother's name, but here's a picture of her. She looks like you, but smaller. The girl colored the not-so-subtle slight. At a fully fleshed-out 6 feet, I didn't think I needed to point out that everyone was smaller than me. Finally, she lowered herself to perch on the edge of the chair in front of my desk. I wanted to help her. Hell, I wanted to help everybody. Like limp flesh, my personality hung on the steel framework of a hero complex. Give me a problem, someone in need, and I'd dive in without looking. The results were consistently spectacular, if not always successful. What was that definition of stupidity? Doing the same thing but expecting a different result? I was living proof, although right now, dead on my feet, the living part was in question. As I took the photo from her outstretched hand, I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes on the girl's face and tried to shake a nervous feeling. Why me? Still afraid to meet my eye. Disappointment was a devastating fear. She stuffed her hand back in her pocket and glared over my shoulder with the teenage, I don't give a fuck, but actually I do, but I don't want you to know it look. Of course, most days I lived in the same headspace, so I got it. Although lack of character, not age, was my excuse. I took a deep breath and stepped off the ledge. The photo had been torn in half. The tear looked old, the edges yellowed. Only one person showed. A young woman, short shorts and a halter top, hands on tiny hips, legs a mile long, and sunglasses that I bet hid a come-hither look. I knew that look. Wow. The word escaped on all the breath I had. You know her. No shit. Mona. My mother. Chapter 2. You do know her! Disappointment fled from the girl's face, replaced by hope and fear. The hope of a dream, the fear of it shattering. I knew that, too. Genetic bonding could explain the whole simpatica thing. Stars whirled in front of my eyes. I felt a little woozy. Mona. I struggled to find enough air to inflate the words. Know her? At this moment, that struck me as odd. Did I know her? All of her, or just the part I experienced? I would have carried that thought further, asking myself if we could ever really know someone, but that sounded like a lame excuse Judge Judy would eviscerate. Was she still on TV belittling those who came to her for help? I didn't know, so I let it lie. Give it a dose of panic, and my brain does weird things. The girl's posture had gone rigid, paralyzed with too many emotions to catalog or counter. Memories blindsided me as I stared at the younger version of my mother. She'd been 15 when she'd had me. Was the photo before or after? Hard to tell, but my first memory of her mirrored the version in the photo. Who is she? The girl's voice wavered. You know her. I can tell. I snorted at the incongruity of all of it. My day, my life, this moment, all of it. Yeah, I know her. Most days I want to kill her. Today was one of them, but I left that part out. I put the photo on the desk between us and pushed it back across toward her with a forefinger, as far away from me as I could get it. She vibrated with need like a puppy. Who? I cut her off. My turn. She started to argue. If you want my help, I get to ask the questions. I sounded in control, proving once again that bullshit artist could be the top skill listed on my resume. Emotions surged. Logical thought shattered. Yet, my voice remained calm, surprising the hell out of me. Her shoulders came up around her ears. She lowered her chin. But that was all the fight I got. Good thing, because I was loaded for bear. If she was playing me, attacking my family. Since my brain had gone offline, flooded with all kinds of neurotransmitters all shouting for flight rather than fight, I started with the obvious. Where did you get this picture? Photos of my mother as a kid weren't easy to come by. Mona was really picky about that. I'd never understood why. Oh, she had her limitations, but vanity wasn't one of them. A fault, yes. A limitation, not so much. The girl shifted, leaning all the way back in the chair, which almost swallowed her. Her chin rested on her chest. I've had it forever. Define forever. Long as I can remember. Who gave it to you? My grandmother. She softened a bit when she mentioned her grandmother. She raised you? The girl nodded. What did she tell you? That the girl in the photo was my mother? Curiously, I got that. I'll admit to foolish, but not stupid. Snark threatened to override civility. For me, a constant struggle. Anything else? The girl looked as out to sea as I felt. Only to look for her in Vegas, and that she wouldn't be as bad as she seemed. I had to chuckle at that. Oh, I think your grandmother was a tad optimistic. But she'd pegged Mona all right. Maybe she really had known my mother. And if so, maybe she could shed some light. Does your grandmother know where you are? She died. Sadness tugged at the corners of her mouth, turning them down. When? 2 weeks. I'm not sure. Her eyes glistened when she looked at me, a quick look, just enough to see the hurt there. Life's been... Her pain sucker punched me, taking my breath. I didn't have much family, but the ones I had were all still here. Although the big boss wasn't recovering from the gunshot as quickly as we all had expected. A shadow of worry drifted across my heart. Loss scared me. To lose the big boss? I cleared my throat, constricted by emotion. Do you have anyone else? Only the lady in the photograph, if you tell me who she is. The girl clung to the frayed end of a short rope. At least she held on. My rope shredded, dropping me into an emotional freefall. The girl looked tired and worried, a bit angry, and a lot lonely, but she also radiated scared. I couldn't shake that. She was afraid of something. I knew it like I knew so much else about the road she'd walked. Everything about her pulled me back to a place and time where I walked in her shoes, and I didn't like having to relive the whole uncertainty of it all. For a young woman, alone, danger lurked in every shadow. I knew exactly where she was coming from. I didn't like that either. Too bad the past was the only immutable in life. I'd love to rewrite mine, and hers. But aren't we the product of our pasts, tempered and molded through experience? Damn. Maybe, just maybe, the girl was afraid of being alone, and I was reading too much into all of this. She'd said 2 weeks since her grandmother had passed. Perhaps all this was as straightforward as it seemed, and she was reeling rather than calculating. I need to know whether you're telling the truth or not. Look at it from my point of view. It wouldn't be too hard for someone to get hold of a photo and come waltzing in here with a grand story. A bit of an overstatement, since it was Mona we were talking about, but the girl didn't know that. I moved from behind the desk to sit in the chair next to her. As I did so, I caught my reflection in a mirror someone had hung on the wall, despite my best intentions to avoid decorating. Limp brown hair, wan skin taut with worry, high cheekbones, as Mona said, my only real asset, and blue eyes, bloodshot and saucered with emotion. Curiously, I looked normal, at least for me. I probably should worry about that, but right now, larger worries demanded my attention. Had Mona really walked away from this girl? Her daughter? Why? What would make a mother do that? Actually, I knew the answer to that. Mona had abandoned me when I'd become a burden. How she'd bungled it had left deep scars. But this wasn't about me. And at least I had answers about my past, if not complete understanding. But what about this one? So many questions. Paths in a forest that led nowhere. Reaching across, I squeezed the girl's arm. I know you're scared, and a bit out of your element. I get that. Been there myself. Curiously, at about your age. Not like this. The myopia of youth. Each one convinced they were the only ones ever to experience the pain of their existence. I'll help you, but you've got to be straight with me. If you don't tell me all that you know, this whole thing is going to be hard to piece together. Her lower lip started to quiver, which made her mad. She pinched her mouth into a thin line of control, then gave me a curt nod. Or at least I thought the nod was for me, but perhaps not. Her eyes had an unfocused, faraway look. Do you know where the picture was taken? On my Gram's farm. All the questions I wanted answered punctured my fear like shrapnel perforated skin. How to find the seeds of truth in her story. Did your Gram own the farm? There'd be deeds and all, easily findable. Pieces to the puzzle. Not outright. She was paying Dr. Dean off, she'd said. A privately financed sale. The deed wouldn't be generated until she'd paid off the farm. Okay, scratch the deed trail. And your name? You haven't told me your name. Jesus, how had I forgotten the most obvious question of all? The girl licked her lips as her gaze darted around my office like a trapped fly searching for an open window. Tawny Rose. Tawny Rose. She'd named herself after a color of lipstick or a kind-hearted stripper. Looked like the girl had an on-again, off-again affair with the truth. But where did she get that photo? Okay, Tawny. I didn't try to hide my skepticism and slight amusement. How old are you? 16. Too young to be by herself in Vegas, wandering casinos in the wee hours looking for her mother. A bad modern take on a Dickens novel. I'd lived that life. I knew the empty heart feeling, thanks to my mother. Mona, what had she done? If the present mimicked the past, in a nutshell, she'd abandoned me, then justified it by leaving me in the care of someone, sort of. A man, my boss, who I found out later, much later, was my father. Of course, she'd left me in the dark about that little factoid. I'd thought I was alone. And now, here we were, a happy little family with a past threatening to blow it apart at the seams. What were the legal boundaries of justifiable matricide? And here I thought I had finally gotten my personal baggage down to a carry-on. Silly me. My mother was a skilled emotional surgeon, slicing, dicing, leaving pencil-thin scars to crisscross one's heart. And that girl I used to be was still a part of me, and her pain gnawed, a tiny beast that could cripple, one bite at a time. Mona had cut and run once. She could have done it again. Funny, but that possibility had never entered my reality. Not until tonight when it walked through my door. If Mother had walked away from this young woman, I'd kill her myself. No one deserves that, especially not a kid. No one should have to live through what I did. Trying to focus, I leaned forward to stare again at the picture on the edge of the desk. The photo was old, Mona very young, but I'd recognize her before I would myself. For as long as I could remember, except for those years where it had seemed she'd abandoned me in Vegas, Mona and I had been the two musketeers. Now she was married to my father, normal for most, but an interesting turn of events for me. I hadn't known about our family ties until recently. My newfound father, Albert Rothstein, aka the Big Boss, was the majority shareholder in the Babylon Group and a major player in Vegas. As such, he and my mother were targets for every grifter and con who could get this far. Did Miss Tawny Rose have an angle? Was she pulling a con? Or did someone send her to undermine Mona's political aspirations? I immediately eliminated the latter. Mona was the proof to the old adage that if you gave someone enough rope, they would hang themselves. With Mother, political suicide was nothing more than a timing issue. Anybody who would care knew that already. You want to know who she is? I asked the girl as I paused and took a deep breath. This was Mona's fight. I couldn't protect her from this one. No, this was a crack that would swallow her tiny, perfect, taut little ass. I know I sounded like I'd like to see her get her comeuppance, but not really. Although there was a part of me that enjoyed seeing Mona swing over the abyss, holding on for her life. Yes, Shallow is my middle name. Not something I was proud of, but something I could live with. God knew she had a myriad of faults. Up to this point, the most important of which was being irritating as hell. But she was, above all, my mother, and that counted for everything. Family, the ties that bind. What I wouldn't do for a knife. As if sensing the answer to her question, the girl leaned forward, hanging on expectation. I delivered the 1-2 punch. She's my mother, Mona. I lifted my chin toward the photo that still lay on the desk like an accusation. But I think you knew that. Mona, the girl whispered with hushed reverence. Misplaced reverence, but I wasn't going to be the one to burst that bubble. A flood of emotions widened her eyes. I didn't know. They were blue, like mine, like Mona's. Mona. This time her voice held a bit less reverence. Your mother. She angled her head as if seeing me anew. And that makes us... Still trying to figure this out. The words should have been sufficient to shut down that line of thinking, but I breathed a bit of cool into them for extra clarity. I tend to overdo, but adjusting to the big boss as my father was hard enough. Then with the recent birth of twin siblings, you'd think after years in the bordello business my mother would know what causes that. I was having a hard time getting my pea brain around my burgeoning family. Now this. How did you happen to get to my office? Of all the gin joints, I knew how Humphrey Bogart felt. Who put me together with that photo? I like your name. Enigmatic to a fault, the girl gave me a half smile, surprising me, and from the look on her face, herself as well. There was more there, but the steely look in those baby blues told me I'd need a pickaxe. But she had more to gain than I did, so that meant I held the cards. Always play the odds, kid. You want your shot with Mona? Then tell me why you like my name. My voice went low, riding on a hard demand. The girl gave it a moment's hesitation, then wilted. Smart girl. My grandfather, he drank. I didn't know him well. He died when I was young. Of a broken heart, my gram said. But there were times just before he'd pass out when he'd talk to himself. I don't know why, but I got the impression he was talking to someone he knew. Someone who was no longer there. He called her Lucky Bean. And that led you to me. How many Luckies do you know? Your name is all over everything at the rodeo. A long shot, with a big payoff. Sometimes you play a hunch rather than the odds. To her credit, she didn't rub my nose in it. Instead, she focused on the photo. Are you sure that girl in my photo is your mother? It's not that clear, and it was taken a long time ago. Emotion thinned her voice, but she looked like some of the pieces to a puzzle she wasn't sharing completely had fallen into place. That's Mona. Even then, she was distinctive. I wondered what she'd been like back then. Carefree, young, future open and bright. How had she ended up a hooker in Pahrump? Why had I never asked? You favor her, the girl said. She did too, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Flattery will get you everywhere. The angels on my shoulders whispered in my ears. Should I believe her? Should I not? Whether she was telling the truth or not, that didn't alter the fact that she really looked like she needed help. And if what she said was true, the good angel won. I so wouldn't like myself if I didn't get to the bottom of her story. Compassion, the upside to bad decisions. At least there was one. The girl glanced toward the doorway, then gave me the eye. No, not the eye, but more of a calculated once-over with the wariness and savvy of a youngster who had seen too much. But some of the kid peeked through in the hope and fear she tried to hide. Yeah, the girl was still in there. She didn't have the tough shell and dead eyes of a kid who lived on the streets. She smelled of horses. The shavings that clung to her fleece jacket told me I wasn't crazy. The rodeo was in town, the Western Finals to be exact. What did you do? Run away with the rodeo? I thought kids ran away to join the circus. Guess I'm hopelessly out of date. What little color she had left her face. What? You're here with the rodeo? I pressed. She flinched like I'd hit her with a cattle prod. How do you know? I pointed to the shavings on her jacket. Some of the tuff melted away. Yeah. She brushed them off and they fluttered to the floor. She didn't pick them up. You got a cleaning crew. An explanation, but hardly an excuse. What was it they said about teenagers? Purposefully irritating so their parents would be ready to see them take wing and fly on their own? What, so they could fly around and poop on the rest of us? Or worse, land in our laps? I wouldn't go back to being a teenager on a bet. A child trying to navigate a grown-up, bad guy world without a map? Yeah, I have a cleaning crew. I'm a big cheese, don't you know? All I really wanted to do was fold her in a hug and tell her life would be okay, that she'd get to be a kid a while longer. But I couldn't promise that, which made me sad and mad at the same time. I glanced at the clock. Still too early, or not late enough, to get off the strip. On New Year's Eve, it was shut down to traffic until morning. Have you eaten? Surprise flickered across her face. No. Why? Hungry then? She wilted into the truth. Starved. Her eyes flicked to the doorway again. Are you expecting someone? I narrowed my eyes. Or maybe someone is following you? Hassling you? The streets were mean for a full-grown badass like me. They'd be hell for the wisp of a kid scared out of her shoes, but determined to pretend otherwise. She met my eyes and held them. No. No one. I didn't believe her, but I let it go. If she had someone coming to shake me down, this was the wrong place to do it. Security in Vegas hotels is unsurpassed. Well, other than letting 16-year-olds in without question. You have a story, and I want to hear it. All of it. I thought we could do it over some food. Tears sprung to her eyes. She gathered her fleece over the heel of one hand and swiped at a drop that had the audacity to trickle down her cheek. Without meeting my eyes, she nodded once. Leaning forward, I raked together my phone and other minor detritus of my life, stuffing them in my Birkin. Then I thought better of it and pulled out my phone, pausing before I dialed. Will the best hamburger in the world suffice? And maybe a milkshake? She looked like I'd offered her a king's repast, which, considering Jean-Charles Bouclé, world-renowned chef, would be doing the cooking, wasn't shading the truth too much. Good then. I hastily texted my chef and got an immediate, affirmative response. No questions asked. Gotta love a guy who was willing to open what I knew to be an almost closed kitchen for the asking. And I did love him. More than I knew, and probably as much as he hoped. The whole fiancé thing was so new, I often blew by it when thinking of Jean-Charles Bouclé, my French chef, and yes, my fiancé. Of course, when thinking about him, rational thought was a wish, but rarely a reality. Warmth rushed through me. I'd stopped trying to control my body's involuntary reaction at the mere thought of my chef. Degrading, so I ignored it. He'd be waiting. I flipped around the big sparkler on my left ring finger a few times as I tried to figure out how to play this whole thing. An impossible task, considering I was running on barely one cylinder, and that was misfiring. Maybe I too needed food. Or maybe I just needed a hug. Come on, it's just upstairs. I gathered her up, and with my hand in the small of her back, escorted her through the outer vestibule of my office and into the hall. I took an immediate right to push through a set of double doors. "Aren't the elevators that way?" she asked, with a nod down the hall. "Yep, but you're getting the VIP tour." After shoving my card in the slot, I punched the button for the top floor, and the machine whirred to life. Too bad my card wouldn't shock my heart back to a normal rhythm. We'd settled in for the ride in the service elevator, me staring at our reflections, the girl studiously avoiding them. Once the doors closed, she stopped doing her imitation of a rabbit ready to bolt. "Mona is a hooker. Or was." I'm not sure why I stated it so harshly, maybe wanting to cut through the whitewash of the girl's fantasy. "Was? You mean she's dead?" The girl looked stricken. The hooker part didn't seem to faze her. "No, sorry. I thought I'd made that clear. She's mean enough to outlive all of us. At present, she's retired from her former profession. And contemplating a political career, I thought. An abandoned child would surely derail Mona's ambition train. Life was like ice. One hard blow, and the consequences radiated outward in unanticipated cracks. "So you really think the lady in the photo is your mother?" I asked the girl the same question she'd asked me, both of us wanting to be sure of the answer. The girl was half my age. Even though I was a bit thrown, I worked through the simple math. She would have been born while I was living in Vegas, working for the man I didn't yet know was my father, and attending UNLV. Mother was still working in Pahrump at her eponymous whorehouse. We didn't see each other often back then. I'd been pissed that she'd dumped me in Vegas. I hadn't known she'd dumped me with my father. I felt like I'd been abandoned, and my mother had become my least favorite person. We both weathered it, but the hurts ran deep. The girl squared her shoulders. "There's only one way to find out. Where is she? My mother. Mona." As the elevator slowed, I pulled my phone out of my bag and squinted at the screen. I didn't wear a watch for obvious reasons. In a casino, the time of day or night didn't matter. It was later than I'd feared. Probably asleep. No matter the personal cost, I wanted a happy ending for the girl, even though I doubted Mona qualified. But she was better than no mother at all, some of the time. The elevator whirred to a soft stop, and the doors slid open. Neither of us moved, even though I could smell the luring aroma of charcoaling beef all the way out here. As the doors started to glide shut, I thrust a hand out, stopping them. "Come on, let's get that food. I'm sure you have a lot more to tell me." The girl gave me the side eye as she stepped by me. "I can find Mona without your help." Jesus, did dealing with a teenager earn one a special place in heaven? No doubt, but getting to her might prove a challenge. I figured the photo would get Mona's attention, and probably an audience with her as well. But with Mother, one never knew. But the girl didn't know that. Besides, the person leading the charge usually takes the first bullet. That shut down any further argument, at least for the moment. Jean-Charles's restaurant was at the end of a short hallway. After serious, prolonged negotiations, we'd settled on JCB Prime as a name. He wanted just JC, but to me, that held a hint of blasphemy. Not that many of us in Vegas knelt before an altar, but still. Jean-Charles had dug in his heels, saying he wasn't going to apologize for his initials, nor shy away from any implication of a divine blessing. I sorta got his point, but I'd countered with, no matter the deity you prayed to, she probably wasn't into having her name emblazoned over a restaurant in Vegas. That argument, and concurrence from his mother, had carried the day. Yes, I called in the heavy reinforcements. All's fair in love and war, and this was both. Such folly mixing business with pleasure. Even I knew that. But even I didn't listen to me. Jean-Charles had left the back door open a crack for us. A bit prophetic, I thought. The back door was the only way I'd be getting into heaven. Anxious for a hug, I went first and dove straight into his arms, almost before he had a chance to turn away from the stove. Burying my face in the crook where neck met shoulder, I breathed him in as he held me tight. Who knew hamburgers could be an aphrodisiac? My lips moved against his warm skin. He chuckled, a rumbling I felt before the sound registered on my heart. I said that out loud, didn't I? Given we had an audience, I should have been embarrassed. But at my last birthday, I'd vowed to give up worrying about what other people thought of me. That was all of 24 hours ago, so that head trip was a bit new. I leaned back in his embrace so I could take the kiss I wanted. He didn't disappoint, and I drank deeply. Before I was ready, Jean-Charles pulled back.
Are you going to introduce us? Or are you going to let your friend stand there in her discomfort?
What was it about Jean-Charles that made conscious thought flee? Just a scant millimeter taller than me in reasonable heels, Jean-Charles looked resplendent in his chef's whites, which hid a body that would drive Adonis to envy, and me to distraction. How I would love to... I chewed on my lip as I let my mind wander. Sex wouldn't make this all go away, but it sure would make me feel better.
Are you going to introduce us?
Amusement lit in his blue eyes. He knew what I was thinking. Perhaps I should have blushed. But blushing was beneath the me I wanted to be. And if anything, I was all about fake it until you make it. I wanted him. We both knew it. He reciprocated. Everyone was happy, albeit a bit frustrated at the moment. I'm sorry, where are my manners? I was usually so good at introductions and all the Emily Post stuff. Mona had seen to that. A hooker with refined sensibilities. Mona was never quite what one expected. I figured hormones and an emotional hand grenade excused a momentary lapse in manners, so I gave myself a pass. Jean-Charles Bouclet, may I present... A momentary blank. I'd forgotten more than my manners. Miss Tawny Rose. I kept a straight face. Another epic win in a night filled with odd games. Jean-Charles raised an eyebrow, but that was it. Miss Rose, may I present Jean-Charles Bouclet, my fiancé, and a rather good chef, who has a way with hamburgers and milkshakes. And a way with you. Tawny gave me a knowing look. Maybe she'd been on the streets longer than I thought. I don't deny it. Jean-Charles, this is Tawny Rose. He bent over her hand, making her blush.
Enchanté.
Then he invited us further inside, before any awkwardness could get a foothold. Come. Turning back to his work, he scooped the patties off the coals, setting them on a rack to the side to rest.
I'll be back in a moment.
Wiping his hands on a rag, he asked Tawny,
Chocolate or vanilla?
She gave a derisive huff.
Chocolate it is. I had you pinned as a chocolate girl.
With a circling motion, he indicated a high-top table with 3 stools next to the stove.
You sit.
Then he disappeared into the restaurant, heading toward the bar. To the side, champagne chilled in a bucket of ice water. I chose a stool next to the champagne. The girl picked the one on the opposite side from me and nearest the door. Pinned? She asked after boosting herself onto the stool. Pegged. I pulled out 2 flutes that Jean-Charles had upended into the ice as well. drying them with the bar towel looped through the handle of the bucket. I placed one in front of his stool and one in front of me. Then I filled the flutes with Laurent Perrier rosé, the good stuff. English vernacular. He gets close most of the time. Frankly, I found his struggle with idioms to be charming. Apparently, Tawny did as well. Color remained in her cheeks as she looked at me from under lowered lashes. I detected a hint of reverence bordering on adulation. Indeed. Somehow, my manners returning, I resisted the overwhelming urge to bolt the champagne until Jean-Charles returned with an extra thick chocolate shake. He handed it to Tawny with a bow, making her giggle. He raised his flute in a toast.
To friends.
To family, I said. The girl looked surprised as we clinked glasses. Underneath my Pollyanna shell lurked a solid pragmatist. If Mona had done something stupid, which was totally within her probabilities, we'd do what we always did. Bitch and moan, and probably panic just a bit, then do the right thing. Jean-Charles plated the food, 1 burger for each of us, 2 for the girl, then joined us, straddling the last stool. Silence reigned as we fell to eating like ravenous wolves. I couldn't remember my last meal. Last night? A birthday celebration? Then Jean-Charles had taken his son, Christophe, home, and I'd gone to work. And I was still there. Tonight, Jean-Charles had been consumed by preparing food for his clientele, and probably hadn't taken time to eat. And Tawny, or whatever her real name was, had the pharaoh look of someone for whom food was hunted rather than provided. Despite my hunger, I managed only a few bites before giving up.
Is the food not to your liking?
Jean-Charles's question rode on an undercurrent of concern. He knew my aptitude for gluttony. I don't seem to have the energy, I lied. Frankly, I just wasn't hungry. Had that ever happened? I couldn't remember. But I still thirsted for a liquid diet. I peered at the bottom of my champagne flute. The rosé had evaporated. That was happening to me more and more lately.
You have had no sleep, yes?
Jean-Charles asked.
And the adrenaline? It is gone now, no?
How did anyone ever figure out how to answer those kinds of questions? Yes, I've had no sleep. Or no, I haven't had any sleep. They were like the thing with the air conditioner. If you turned it up, did that mean you made it colder? Or was it the other way around? Clearly, higher thought was beyond my current competence, so I simply nodded, letting him jump to whatever conclusion he wanted. Without being asked, he refilled my flute. I didn't complain. Normally, champagne brought clarity. Of course, tonight would be the night that formula failed. Jean-Charles finished his burger, and the girl ate her too, telling me I'd figured her situation accurately. At least as far as sustenance went. I pushed my plate toward her. Here, finish mine. Her milkshake mustache made me smile. She nodded and kept eating. I sipped my champagne, trying to restrain myself with a modicum of success, while I waited for her to finish. Finally, she looked up from her food, her plate clean, her milkshake a memory. She cocked one eyebrow at Jean-Charles. Dessert?
As you wish.
He gave me a wink as he backed off his stool, then disappeared into the walk-in cooler. Jean-Charles was playing to every chef's dream, a ravenous, appreciative customer. The food had softened the girl's pharaoh look, so I decided the time was ripe for more questions. Can you tell me where you're from? Outside of Reno. Your grandmother's ranch? She nodded. Her name? This was where the rubber met the road. That's the thing about lies. So hard to keep straight. I felt like adding, "The truth will set you free." But somehow, I didn't think she'd get the reference. She hadn't enough years to have amassed enough worthless references, and I really didn't feel like being that self-righteous. No matter our age, we each had our own coping mechanisms. Lying wasn't the best, but it was the one most often tried first. Sarah Pickford? Pickford? Between Pickford and O'Toole, there were far too many movie references in this family. You'd think that if fantasy was a family heirloom, someone would have created a better one. Her fourth husband. Long story. But she kept trying. Your Gram's ranch is where the photo was taken? Yes, but long before I arrived. Folding her napkin crease by crease absorbed her attention. She flicked her gaze to mine, then back to her napkin. That math I could do for myself. I wanted to jerk her napkin away. And the place is yours now? Surprise flickered. A lawyer is figuring it out. He said it would take a while. Do you live there? I did. Right now, I'm traveling with the rodeo, as you guessed. In what capacity? This time she looked at me a fraction of a second longer. Then her face started to close. Just a helper. Her need to tell the truth warred with self-preservation. To whom? She eyed me like my IQ had suddenly plummeted. The horses? I raised one eyebrow. I muck out the stalls and shit. She rewarded me with an eye roll. Rule number 1 in the Amateur Interrogation Handbook. Get under their skin. 1 and done. I resisted gloating as bad form and ignored the fact I was barely holding my own in a contest with a 16-year-old. Are you in school? I finished early. Finished? You mean graduated or left? I'd keep pushing until I got stonewalled. Graduated. And? Her hands dropped in a knot to her lap. I left. Why? Pale replaced the pink in her cheeks. Her shoulders dropped as the attitude faded. The truth. So very close. I could almost taste it. I leaned forward slightly. Grabbing her and shaking would probably not get the result I wanted, but it would feel really good. Instead, I summoned my last bit of self-control and waited. The need to tell me shimmered off her in waves. I held my breath until I saw stars. She pulled in a deep lungful of air. Her gaze locked onto mine. She opened her mouth to speak. Jean-Charles breezed back to the table. Tawny clamped her mouth shut and painted on a smile. He slid a tray in front of us with a flourish.
A most excellent millefeuille. My pastry chef?
He put his fingers to his lips, then made a kissing motion.
She is to kill for.
The look I threw him flew by my pastry-enraptured chef like a knife in a circus act. Good thing there weren't any sharp knives within reach. This might be my circus, but it was not an act. A few more moments and I would have had something. Maybe even a hint at the whole truth. To kill for? Tawny, her chin still tucked, glanced at me. To die for. I settled back, letting the rancor go. I'd shake the truth out of her somehow.
Yes, this,
Jean-Charles said, completely unaware of just how close death was. He dealt each of us clean plates, then gave me a small piece, per my usual request, and a whopper for our young guest. The kid was from Nevada. That surprised me. I was expecting someplace further away. Don't know why, other than folks who blindsided me in the past had tended to travel a great distance for the privilege. Teddy had been born in Boston. Teddy. Why was he the first to spring to mind? And why did first loves hurt so much? Jean-Charles had hailed from Provence. Both your grandparents are gone. Do you have any other family? I asked. Mona had never mentioned any family, and I'd assumed she would have had she had any. Right now, life rubbed my nose in the fallacy of that assumption, or at least the very real possibility that Mona had kept secrets. Oh, sure, I'd known she was famous for skirting the truth, but not from me, not from her own flesh and blood, her own daughter. How could I have been so naive, so arrogant in my place in her life? But hiding secrets? That never dawned on me. Stupid in retrospect. Secrets were so a part of my mother's way of dealing with reality. No one. Just the lady in the photograph, like I said. Mona, I said to Jean-Charles, to bring him into the conversation at least somewhat. Jean-Charles's eyebrows shot toward his hairline as he cocked his head toward the girl and gave me a questioning glance. I gave him a little shrug. He knew how to interpret it. If he was looking for more, that's all I had. Other than your grandmother's story, is there any other reason you believe she's your mother? I asked Tawny. I kept looking for a more solid answer, even though I knew she didn't have one. Or not one she would share with me anyway. Maybe she was holding the heavy artillery for Mona. She paused with a forkful of pastry halfway to her mouth. Like what? A letter or something? If I got the teenage nuance right, her tone told me she thought I was being lame. A birth certificate? Her facade crumpled, letting the scared come through. I don't have anything. No papers. Nothing to prove who I am or where I came from. My grandmother is gone. There's no one else. All I have is that photo and a story.
Your school?
It was pretty casual. She gave a shrug that implied a casualness not reflected in her tight, hard stare. We lived in the country. What secrets had her grandmother been hiding? And why? And why tell the girl Mona was her mother? Was Mona just a random kid in an old picture that the grandmother used to give the girl a story? A family? But where did she get the photo? Random thoughts swirled around in my head. Bats in my belfry. Clearly I was losing it. Any idea who else was in that picture? Why they were torn away and discarded? No, my gram didn't tell me much. She looked over my right shoulder, as if the tile wall behind me and above the stove was fascinating. Liars look up and to the left. I read that somewhere. Or maybe my bud, Detective Romeo, with the Metropolitan Police Department, taught me that. Lately, he'd been teaching me more than I had him. A reversal in our relationship. Not sure I liked it, but that never stopped the fates from interfering in my status quo. Jean-Charles opened his mouth to speak. I quieted him with a hand on his arm and a gentle squeeze. Well, perhaps Mona can shed some light, but not now. It's too late. I ignored the crestfallen look. No way was I going to play my ace until I saw a few more of her cards. We need to find you a place to stay. I'm good. I'm staying with a friend from the rodeo. What I'd really like to do is find Mona. That's what I came here for. I know. We both need to hear what she has to say. But haven't you accomplished a lot for one day? Family. Weren't they like the 5th level of purgatory or something? Tawny looked terrified yet excited. That mix of adrenaline and fear the second before you leap with only a bungee attached to an ankle. I'll go see her myself. The girl was like a tick on a dog. Be my guest. Your funeral. Mona was my one ace, and I wasn't above playing it. Jean-Charles laughed. God bless him. Wise to my tricks, he played along.
Mona, he gave a low whistle. She's got a nip, that one.
Bite, I corrected, with a side eye at the girl.
Yes, this.
Jean-Charles patted the girl's hand.
And she is married to a very important man in this town. A man with many friends and many enemies.
Okay, he was starting to overplay. She's not easy to get to, I said, cutting off Jean-Charles, or making his point, as I preferred to look at it.
Yes, this.
He leaned back and folded his arms across his chest. She can't be mad at me, the girl whined. I didn't do anything. She'll certainly be surprised. I wasn't feeling the normal delight I had when I one-upped my mother, which was rare indeed. This drama had a human heart element to it that was tragic, no matter how it turned out or what the truth was. I quit overplaying my own hand. In my gut, I knew that even though this was my problem, it wasn't my fight. But mad? I don't think so. The sight of her, the plaintive unhappiness in her voice, I wilted, and I went with my instinct and wrapped her in a hug. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed into me. It'll be okay, I whispered against her hair. We'll figure it out. You're here now, and family or not, we'll take care of you. The girl needed a friend, a champion. Playing that role was in my wheelhouse. I released her, but kept an arm looped around her shoulders. Let's go. We've prevailed upon Chef Bouclé's kindness long enough. Let's get you a shower and some shut-eye. Then we can handle all of this tomorrow when our strength is at full throttle. I've got a place. I told you that. The girl backed off her stool. Well, if you're with me, then whoever is looking for you won't be able to find you. She froze, still as a statue. I don't know what you mean. In my office, you were as twitchy as a rabbit in a greyhound race. Once we got into the elevators and came up here where no one else can come and no one would think to look, you calmed down. That tells me you're running from someone. She opened her mouth, then clamped it shut, her eyes bugging as she looked over my shoulder. She's running from me. I whirled around. Detective Romeo. Standing in the doorway, he looked stern. Well, actually, he looked only slightly older than 12, his sandy hair a trifle long, something my youngest assistant, Brandy, probably had a hand in. His boyish face unmarred by the shadow of a beard, his overcoat shrouded his thin frame, while his cowlick stood at attention from the crown of his head, a flag waving in surrender. When we'd first met over a woman who was pushed out of a tour helicopter at a very inconvenient time and altitude, he'd been a greenhorn. I'd taken him under my wing, shown him the ropes. While he still didn't have the connections a Vegas brat like me had, he'd worked his way up the food chain to where he had the audacity to consider himself my equal. Although it galled, he was probably right. Either way, we had each other's backs. Regardless, somehow I'd been left off the invitation list to his graduation, so his new attitude still took me by surprise. Well, don't you sound officious and dull? I put myself between him and the girl. I wasn't aware of it until I'd done it. Romeo looked nonplussed, tilting his head in an invitation to get out of his way. Seriously? That was as effective as chiseling stone with a chopstick. While I appreciated his competence, I missed his happiness. You do know you can do your job and still actually like it, don't you? His bluster melted a bit when he ran into the heat of my glare, which deepened when I saw who was with him. Paxton Dane muscled in beside the young detective, looking lean, luscious, and less than trustworthy, all traits that, unfortunately, I discovered the hard way. A long, tall Texan who had wooed me while he was still married, managed to get his estranged wife killed, then left. Recently, he'd returned, acting as if all was forgiven. I was still struggling with the distinction between forgiving and forgetting. Thankfully, I hadn't fallen for Dane's act, nor succumbed to his charm, so I wasn't struggling with forgiving myself, for once. My history with handsome men would flesh out an entire line of Harlequin romances without the happy endings, but Dane wouldn't be a chapter. "Why is she running from you?" I asked the young detective. Romeo waved my question aside, which usually meant he was committed to the wind-up before throwing the pitch. Surprisingly, I found one last urge of patience. "That girl there." He lifted his chin toward the girl who now cowered behind me. "We tailed her here. Then Dane got security to trace where she'd gone in the hotel." "We got to your office, but you weren't there," Dane added. I gave him a look intended to wither steel. "Brilliant deduction, Watson. Am I supposed to be impressed?" "That'd be the day," Romeo said out of the side of his mouth. "I'm really sorry, Lucky, but she needs to come with me." "Why?" "She's wanted for murder." Chapter 3. Murder? My brain freewheeled as my mouth went slack. Romeo didn't normally embrace hyperbole, so I took him at his word. Murder? She's a kid, for Christ's sake. And so thin, if she was a twig, she'd snap. Who do you think she killed? Dane stared at the ceiling, while Romeo looked like he would have dug his toe into the cement floor if he thought that wouldn't be undignified for someone on his lofty rung of the detective ladder. "Somebody grow a pair and tell me." I reached behind me and grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her closer. Finally, Romeo met my eyes. "We don't know if she killed anybody. If you'd stand down from the Mother Bear act, maybe we could find out." Parsing words scratched at the thin veneer of my patience. "Who died?" "One of the bull riding support staff. This girl played a part in that." My eyes went slitty. I hated when Romeo played fast and loose with me, especially when murder was involved. I would have said murder is a serious business, but I didn't think I could do it and keep a straight face. "Allegedly. No matter what you think, it's still only an allegation." "Whatever." He was begging for it. "Do I have to give you the innocent before proven guilty speech?" He looked so unhappy that I softened. "What has happened to you?" He rubbed a hand over his eyes. His shoulders slumped as he lost all of the badass. "You work with ugliness all day, and that becomes all you see." "Attitude, grasshopper. Haven't I taught you anything?" He started to answer. I stopped him with a raised finger. "Wait, let me rephrase. Haven't you learned anything?" "Yes, but probably not the lessons you intended." The Romeo I knew and loved peeked through in his tired smile. "Have you gotten any sleep?" He'd been with me in China, and we'd flown home on the same plane. Just 30 hours or so ago, he was riding herd on a jewel thief in Macau, and I was running on fumes trying to catch a killer. Same life, different location. The synchronicity pointed to me as the commonality, an upsetting thought. So I did what I always do with serious problems. I ignored it. If you can't fix it, why worry about it? A fitting epitaph. Sleep? I gave a little snort of derision and stifled the urge to hug him too. What was it with me lately, going all squishy? You either, from the looks of you. Not a wink. A little haunt widened his eyes. I still keep seeing... I know. I shivered, then yanked myself back. Wait, since when do bull riders have support staff? The clown. They think I killed the clown, Tawny blurted from behind my back. She stepped into view, but still stayed close enough that I'd take the first bullet. Where our shoulders touched, her nervousness vibrated through me. I grabbed her arm. Squeezing tight, I held her close. Don't say another word. Not one. I squeezed until she flinched. You got that? She ducked her head like the kid she really was. Yes'm. How do you know I'm here about a clown? Romeo asked, leaning around to get a look at her. I felt her start to answer. Don't. He gave me a look of exaggerated patience. If she cooperates, that will help us both. But I don't think our needs are the important ones right now. I lasered him with a stare. Do you? He completely wilted. Of course not. Good. Get her to the station, put her lawyer next to her, then have at it. This is too important to push the boundaries, Romeo. His name is Romeo? I heard the smile in the girl's voice. It's detective to you. I pulled her around next to me so I could give her the slitty eye. Even when I'm not there, not one word. It's life or death critical. Yes'm. Drawing a deep breath, I stood tall, swine that I am. I am rarely above using my height to intimidate. Of course, Dane still had me by a few inches, but Romeo was somewhat responsive to intimidation. I closed the space between us until it was slightly uncomfortable. To his credit, he didn't retreat. Is that right? You think she had something to do with the clown's demise? I stepped on a grin. Maybe it was the jet lag, or the champagne, or just the incredible oddness of the whole evening, but I felt an almost uncontrollable need to laugh welling up inside me. Clowns are people too, Lucky. Romeo bit his lip when he said it. Even though he fancied himself all grown, he still had a streak of juvenile humor, and he knew exactly which buttons to push. I swallowed the laugh. It didn't help that Romeo was feeding me lines like a vaudeville straight man. Stop that. I turned to Dane. So, what about the clown? He was trussed like a baby calf, Dane said, ignoring Romeo's daggered look. And that girl's rope was a murder weapon. She started to say something. I pulled her arm. Don't. Not until your lawyer is present and he says you can open your mouth. Until then, keep it shut. How many times do I have to say that? I stared at Dane. That's redundant. What? He said, momentarily derailed. Baby calf. A calf is a baby, and therefore baby calf is redundant. Everyone stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. They were more than half right. I didn't do it. Stop! I got control of myself, then gave her a fleeting smile and waited until I had her attention. I know, but you did know the clown was dead. We just have to go through the formalities. Work with me. Romeo's a good guy. He'll help you. I looked at Dane, then decided not to say a word. Trust once broken. I've done this a time or two. Curiously, that seemed to calm her. I don't know why. It scared the hell out of me. I don't have a lawyer. Her voice didn't waver. I took that as a good sign. At least she'd been hearing, if not listening. You will. I know just who to call. I returned my attention to Dane. Trussing the clown wouldn't kill him. As she sidled in as close as she could get, the girl pressed something into my hand. The photo. She didn't want the police to see it. Curious. I kept my eyes on Dane as I slipped the one connection to my mother into my pocket. Neither of the men acted as if they'd seen anything. She threw an extra loop around his neck, apparently, Dane continued. The prelim is the guy suffocated, but the coroner will let us know when he reaches a conclusion. Us? Do you have an official role here? He leveled his emerald green eyes on me.
As official as yours.
A high schooler trying to muscle into the bigs. I found that oddly irritating. Apparently, she threw an extra loop. Unlike my friends, I was hearing and listening. I looked to Romeo for an answer, an official answer.
I haven't been to the crime scene yet. Reynolds is working it.
Reynolds. Romeo shrugged off the opinion written all over my face. Detective Reynolds and his boorish bravado actually had been the catalyst to bring Romeo and me into a working relationship. When it came to Reynolds, I was grateful for that, but little else. You're telling me that a 16-year-old girl threw a loop around a fully grown man's neck and strangled him? She must have some superpowers we're unaware of.
She could have been on a horse and drug him a while,
Dane said, sounding like the smart kid trying to earn points with the teacher. I lowered my gaze at the Texan. Don't go making things up without evidence to support them. I turned to Romeo. Anything to support that theory?
You'll have to talk to Reynolds. He's working the scene.
Terrific.
Look, step aside. Let me talk to the girl.
Romeo held up a hand, cutting me off.
We'll wait until her attorney is present before questioning her. It's late, but I don't go all stupid after midnight. Then let me get to the scene and I'll fill you in as to what we've found.
He could see my hesitation.
Get the girl a lawyer. It'll all come out. If she's innocent, that'll come out too.
I didn't share his confidence. Justice was blind and all of that, but it would only scare the girl if I said so. Are you arresting her?
Detaining.
Semantics. I stepped in close to Romeo, using my height and my current lack of self-control. She's a kid. 16. Romeo straightened, but still couldn't meet me eye to eye. Score 1 for the home team. I pressed my advantage. I'm the only adult around. No parents, no family, at least not close. So I'll take responsibility for her. Romeo gave an "I hope you know what the hell you're doing" look, which I ignored. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and gave me an "I'm sorry" look. I stepped to the side, giving him the floor to read the girl her Miranda rights. Those words always dropped the floor out from under me, a reminder that this shit was real. Last time I'd been with Teddy. When the detective had finished, the girl was pale with the cold slap of reality. I felt the control I so desperately needed slipping away. Dane, you make sure she says nothing until her attorney shows up. You got that? He flinched at the bite in my tone. You can do that without screwing it up, right? He nodded, but I'd seen his enormous talent for incompetence. Keep her in your sight. Don't let her go for even 1 minute. Send the bill to me. Can you do that?
Full fee plus expenses?
Full refund if you fuck up. He extended a hand. We had our deal. Where are you going? Tawny asked, a tremor in her voice. I want you to come with me. I put my hands on her shoulders and waited until she looked at me without wavering. I'll be there, but I need to go roust your attorney out of bed. Go with them. But remember what I said. Don't say anything. Her voice was a little stronger, but not much. She gave me a quick hug. Thank you. I held her longer than necessary, squeezing hard. Then I turned and jabbed a finger in Romeo's chest. By the book, detective. You do one thing to coerce a statement out of her, and I'll have your head on a pike. His Adam's apple bobbed as he nodded. I was overplaying. We both knew it. Romeo understood what it meant. We were a good team. A tiny stick of a girl between the two men. Tawny disappeared through the door. She didn't look back. Silence wrapped around me like an itchy, wet wool blanket. When the girl left, the air had left too, and I struggled to breathe.
I can say, without hesitation, that you are quite likely the most interesting woman I have ever met.
Jean-Charles. I hadn't forgotten, not really, but he'd faded in light of the murder thing. I turned and met his half-amused, half-worried-as-hell look. I'd seen a lot of that look recently. I opened my arms in supplication. This stuff finds me. What can I say? There I was, sitting in my office, signing like a million pointless papers, and she walks in with a story.
You don't have to fall for every pretty face with a sad tale.
I sidled in close to him. He took the not-so-subtle hint and encircled me in a hug. I fell for yours.
But I have no sad story.
Neither of us mentioned his wife who had died in childbirth, the one his family had loved and he still called to in his dreams. No, but you are mercurial. He didn't deny it.
You do like the drama, no?
No. The lie slipped out. What? I should stop helping people?
You cannot stop being you. Drama comes with problems.
He was arguing both sides, so I stepped out of the conflict. He released me, then grabbed my hand, tugging me with him.
Come, I am not trying to change you, merely keep you safe.
You can't.
This I know.
Sadness and a hint of vulnerability crept in. He'd lost a love before. How could the heart stay open in the face of such devastation? Mona had left. Teddy had left. One day he might decide my life held a bit too much downside, and he would leave. Could I trust Jean-Charles not to? Could I handle it if he did? Was the possibility of happiness worth the price of potential pain? Would the Almighty please send a godogram with the answers? Even though I asked, I knew that one would be a no. This one was on me. But to be honest, I never did like the whole risk-reward thing. If I ruled the world, we'd all just get the reward part. Mona used to tell me that without the bad, we wouldn't appreciate the good. I wondered how she'd feel about that now.
I will be here for you,
Jean-Charles said, as if he could read my mind. I didn't much like being so transparent to him either, but the fact was as immutable as the cost-benefit paradigm I railed against. You amaze me.
This is a good thing,
he said with a little laugh, a very little laugh.
You scare the hell out of me.
This too is a good thing. He treated that as a joke as he handed me my purse.
You must go. The girl.
His eyebrows came together, the harbinger of a question.
Why did you not go with her?
She's holding back, playing me. Thought perhaps I needed to show her she's in the big leagues now. Romeo will take care of her.
You want to shake her, yes?
Yes. And now it's time to roust an attorney out of bed. I hoped he was alone, or things could get testy. Then perhaps it's time to talk to my mother. Tonight, I rode the slippery slope from bad to worse. Squash Trenton lived in a small house in what I like to call a suburb of downtown, on the outskirts of Naked City. A formerly decent part of town, Naked City, where the showgirls used to sun topless on the roofs of their apartment buildings, had been claimed by unsavories, but was now going through a bit of a resurgence. Caught between the old and the new, it had a fighting chance of renewal sticking. The apartment buildings were a thing of the past, leaving small streets of comfortable cottages, most of which now sported bars on the windows and peeling paint. But old Vegas charm still lurked in the detailing. A frescoed stucco, filigreed window casements, date palms stunted by the desert and the unrelenting sun, but fighting for a foothold. A visual metaphor for the city itself. The old Andres, one of the restaurant institutions of a classier Vegas, and the scene of much of the important history of my life, had occupied one of the small homes that now sat dark and abandoned as I slipped past. Nostalgia arrowed through me, leaving a sense of loss, but the warm comfort of memories. Of course, with change, the tangible talismans were disappearing, leaving only the hope of remembering. Change. The more I had, the more I struggled with it, or maybe against it. Is that what age does? Or maybe it's that the past is the only immutable thing in life, a constant that creates a comfort. Either way, sometimes a drift down memory lane did the heart good. Even though I doubted Squash Trenton had a sentimental bone in his body, I could see why he'd chosen to live here. Near the courthouse and the bail bondsman, but far enough away to avoid having the desperate crawling through his windows at night, present company excluded, of course. Unless to escape a fire or a potential homicide, I drew the line at crawling through windows. The large gaps in streetlights gave the neighborhood an eerie feel, as if it had been designed to hide things in the darkness. Or maybe it was simply a throwback to a different time when kids played in the streets and neighbors looked out for each other, so lights weren't to hold back the darkness. Now, despite an uptick in respectability, Many of the bungalows had bubbled stucco, curled trim, and bars on the windows. Progress. That whole reality thing again. I tried not to let it bother me. And I tried not to let it bother me that once again I was calling on Squash Trenton, hat in hand. Squash wasn't, of course, his real name. At least I didn't think so. I had no idea where Squash, both as a name and as a man, came from. Not that it mattered. He came highly recommended by my father. Come to think of it, I had no idea how my father came to appreciate the skills of a criminal defense attorney. Not that that mattered either. But I was seeing a trend here that was a bit upsetting. While not in the top 5, being out of the loop was on my top 10 most hated things list. Squash's windows were dark when I eased to the curb and killed the engine. They wouldn't remain so long. As I'd made my way down the street, I'd seen lights in the houses pop on. My arrival wasn't particularly stealthy. With over 700 horses and an exhaust system designed to attract attention, the Ferrari was more of a look-at-me car than a fly-under-the-radar one. Not that I cared. The Ferrari was a loner. My classic Porsche had met a fiery end, and I had yet to replace it. Italian or German? The decision was impossible. But lately, I had the sneaking suspicion I might have outgrown the Ferrari. Maybe even the Porsche. But Porsche made an SUV now. Progress. Was age nothing more than hope shifting to resignation? Again, I tried not to let it bother me. In front of Squash's house, I flipped the car into neutral, then gunned the engine a time or two before killing it. After the day I'd had, any interest in playing nice had long since evaporated. A light flicked on in a window to the far right as I eased the car door shut. Although not worried about making a racket, I couldn't bring myself to abuse the car by slamming the door. The circle of weak light cast by the nearest street lamp did little to illuminate the path to the front door. As I muttered an epithet and hoped I wouldn't sprain an ankle, the light over the front door flipped on with the brightness of an interrogation beam. Appropriate, in a way, and I appreciated the irony. Needing time to adjust, my eyes watered a bit. The brick of the sidewalk looked new, the grout still clean. In fact, in the light, the house looked well cared for. The front door, painted a fire engine red, made me smile. People constantly surprised me. Squash Trenton, uber lawyer, badass, and macho male, was no exception. A red door, a port in a storm. Squash opened the door as I lifted my hand to knock. "Working hard to endear me to my neighbors?" His smile looked genuine, which went with the rest of him. His hair stood straight up at the crown, but was smashed on one side. He hadn't bothered to throw a robe on. In fact, he hadn't donned anything other than a pair of boxers. He had that thick, muscled physique of a wrestler, which somehow fit, and he didn't mind showing it off, or using it to his advantage. If I knew him like I thought I did, his attire, or lack thereof, was carefully calculated to put me off guard, an ingrained lawyer trick to give him the initial advantage. Although not a lawyer, I was wise to the game. And the fact that he thought it'd work on me? Not a chance. On a good day. But today had been so far from good, I couldn't see it from here. And given my weakened state, his ploy had a fair chance of success. I stopped on the stoop feeling a bit bedraggled. "Knowing you, I doubt you care what your neighbors think." He leaned around me. "On the contrary, Miss Perino, who lives in the house over there," he pointed to a house hiding in the darkness across the street, "she gave me the most incredible apple pie recipe. And Miss Buell," again he pointed at a house, this time one further up the street, "she taught me how to make the most incredible hollandaise, from scratch, in the microwave." Offending every true French man and woman alike, but point made, apologies offered. "It's okay. They both are deaf as posts. Wouldn't hear a bomb if it went off on their front porch. I check on them regularly. They don't have anybody." What? A softy hiding under that shark exterior? Yin and yang are immutables in life. But you won't tell my secrets. Really? Why not? You need me. I hadn't even gotten an invitation inside, and I was already down in this game. My energy was low as my stomach growled. I should have eaten that hamburger. Did you ever get Mrs. Morales' recipe for green chili?
Oh man, that woman. His tone dripped with respect. If she went to law school, she'd run this town.
Squash shook his head.
I'd hate to run up against her in court.
What did she make you do? He looked like he'd paid dearly.
I had to fix Freddie's tickets.
Freddie was her son, and the object of our mutual dislike.
At first, I thought I'd gotten the best of her.
Never underestimate a woman who holds the cards. Don't you know better than that? Men, even the enlightened ones, assumed a woman would be an easy adversary. For some reason, I thought Squash Trenton would have been a bit more educated by now. How many tickets did Freddie have?
200? The magistrate wanted to shoot me.
One of these days you'll listen to me. I told you you'd met your match.
Yeah, but that recipe...
Was it worth it?
I would have taken care of 2,000 tickets.
That good. Men and their recipes. Well, I'm glad death wasn't the price you had to pay, as I have need of your services.
The middle of the night. It must be important. I'm all ears. You want a cup of coffee?
He opened the door wider. Stepping back, he motioned me inside. He wasn't all ears. Even in my diminished state, I could appreciate that. A cup won't even get my starter to turn over. Do you have an intravenous set up? That would be far easier. My body vibrated with need for caffeine. I stepped into the front hall, blinking against the light and trying to ignore his lack of appropriate attire. But of course, what would be considered appropriate when a woman shows up in the dead of night inappropriately? A question requiring far more nuance than I could muster. Squash looked a bit owl-eyed in the light as well.
An enema does the trick even better.
Please, I'm very visual, and it's too early in the morning for that kind of trauma. A shiver chased through me, and suddenly I was cold, very cold, my body in shutdown mode. When I was 20, I could run on fumes forever. I wasn't 20 anymore, and my body felt I needed a reminder. An enema? Shit. I'm not even going to think about that, much less think about how you know that. He shut the door, then threw 3 deadbolts before turning his back and charging toward the back of the house, motioning me to follow.
This way.
I fell into trail, trying not to stare at his ass and the way the muscles clenched under the thin fabric as he walked. I failed.
Law school, drinking. You do what you need to do.
An enema?
As drunk as I wasn't going to let one of my buddies perforate my arm with a needle looking for a vein. An enema was the next most expedient hangover cure. You'd be surprised.
He got that right. More information than I needed. I took refuge behind the center island.
You asked.
One of those shimmering silver devices with all the tubes and water vessels and knobs and dials that one needed a 6-week course in how to operate, squatted on the sideboard that sagged under the machine's weight.
Espresso?
He asked, demitasse in hand. On my heels, I caved. Sure, the higher the octane, the better. I stared at the back of his head, and for the record, counselor, I did not ask. He set to work making us tiny cups of coffee tar. I wouldn't have minded a bit of white stuff to improve the viscosity, but I thought perhaps that might offend some Java juju or something, so I kept my desires to myself. All of them. Finally, he turned, setting a cup in front of me while keeping one for himself.
But you did ask. Maybe not in so many words, but that's what you do. You say you're not going to ask, but it's really what you want to know. And for the record, espresso has less caffeine per cup than regular drip coffee.
Couldn't you have left me happy in my ignorance? I sipped at the brew, finding it surprisingly good.
I'm a lawyer. Truth, justice, and all that.
With the cup almost to my lips, I paused and looked at him over the rim. That's a joke, right? He shrugged, but didn't argue.
Tough crowd.
I took another sip and savored the hit, minimal as it was. I'm that easy to read?
No, but reading people is my job, or a big part of it anyway.
With my courage flagging, I considered having him run interference with Mona. I could use someone adept to get a beat on her, especially now. Our next visit would be a doozy, but with Mona, a handsome man would just gum up the works. So I abandoned my plan. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup as a shiver chased through me. "Aren't you cold?" He glanced down, then turned and grabbed an apron hanging from a hook on the side of the refrigerator. Slipping it over his head, he tied the string in the back, then turned, arms wide, expecting my appreciation.
Better?
A Superman apron, stained from use. Red from tomato sauce, I bet. The yellow one could be hollandaise. "Hey, it's your superhero fantasy, not mine." I tried for nonplussed. From the slight widening of his eyes, I knew I achieved it. But his grin told me he could tell I was at least half lying. Okay, I admit it. He was the stuff dreams are made of, assuming I went for incredibly handsome, yet irritatingly obnoxious hired guns who were too smart for my own good, which I didn't. Well, not for longer than a weekend in Tahoe, anyway. But that sort of romantic gymnastics was part of my past youthful indiscretion. Kids had weekends. Adults had... what? I chalked up my lack of character at the moment to the whole grass is greener thing. Who wasn't attracted to bad boys at least a little bit? He even cooked, and everyone knew about my love affair with food. But I had a good man at home. Boys, even bad boys, were things of my past. At least that's what I kept telling myself, and I took a lot of convincing. One of my biggest faults is that I find the status quo boring. Yeah, Mona wasn't the only one waiting for me to grow up. Even though I'd adopted a no-touch rule when it came to bad boys, that didn't mean I didn't like to look. But, this being business, and considering my weakened state, I was glad he'd put on the apron. Even if it didn't add any dignity, at least it added a touch of class and modesty. Not much of a touch, but at this point, I'd take anything. Squash watched me as if he could read the thoughts pinging around in my hollow skull. I hated it when men did that. So smug. Worse, they were almost always wrong, but never believed it.
You show up at my place in the middle of...
He glanced at the clock above the sink. A cat, its tail moving in tick-tock time, then gave a low whistle.
Way past the middle of the night.
He gave me an appreciative glance.
This late? My place? I get to pick the attire.
Deal, but I get to pick the topic of conversation.
Was that ever in doubt?
I sipped the last of my espresso, a meager amount of caffeine, barely enough to get my heart rate's attention. Enough of the sissy cups. Make my next one a quadruple.
That bad?
His expression sobered as business knifed through the banter. Better make a quad for yourself, too. But we can't linger. We need to get a move on. He did as I suggested, except he didn't hurry. The wheels of justice move slowly and all of that. I worried about the girl, picturing her in the sterile environment of the detention center, scared, without a friend. Dane didn't count, and I wondered if I'd done the right thing. The cops wouldn't abuse her. Romeo would see to that. But giving her a peek through the door at real-world consequences would do me good. Scare the truth out of her. Squash and I gathered around a tiny table in the corner. The space was small, the squeeze tight, but we did it. 2 adults of some size around a kid's coloring table. Somehow, that seemed to fit the circumstances.
I'd suggest the dining room, but there are no drapes on the window, and Miss Pence across the street is up all night and obsessively curious about my sex life.
Do you have a lot of sex on the dining room table? I said that with a straight face and a steady heart rate. Women of the world, take note and be impressed.
I do have an obligation to keep my octogenarian neighbor's fantasies intact.
Self-imposed obligation? He gave me that point.
So, what do you have?
I filled him in, leaving out the darkest family secrets. Of course, the only ones I knew were my own, and unfortunately, this wasn't all about me. On second thought, strike that. For once, I was glad it wasn't about me.
This kid, she thinks Mona is her mother?
Squash's voice had gone soft and quiet. I tried to read his emotion, but I couldn't. So she says,
"Have you talked to your parents about this yet?"
"No, I haven't had the time." Leaning back, he stared over my shoulder as he chewed on his lip. Then he gave a soft snort and shook his head. "What?"
"Just interesting. You never know when the past is going to walk through your door, do you?"
His gaze flicked to mine and held it. "What do you mean by that exactly?" He gave me the innocent eye.
"You haven't spoken with your father?"
"No. Why?"
"Considering the length of his relationship with your mother, and this girl claiming Mona is her mother, your father might be able to add the flip side of that."
I'd thought of it, but didn't want to admit it. Undying fealty and all that implies.
Wouldn't hurt to give him a couple of single malts and see what you can get out of him.
He knew my father well enough to know his whiskey preferences. I wasn't sure what to make of that. Squash moved on, maneuvering the conversation with a lawyer's skill.
"What do you know about the guy who was killed?"
A bit at sea. For once I didn't mind being maneuvered. Not a thing, other than he was dressed up like a rodeo clown and had a rope around his neck. Allegedly, it belonged to the girl.
"You got a name?"
"No, that's all I got. Romeo hasn't been to the scene. When he gets there, then I'll know more." As I worked on my coffee, I felt the caffeine raising a pulse. Right now, I'd like to find out if the girl really is Mona's daughter.
"If she is?"
There was something in his tone I couldn't place. His flat expression didn't offer even a hint. "I hope you have time for a Murder One client."
"Yin and yang, Lucky. There's always two sides. Remember that."
"They teach you that in law school?"
"University of Nevada was progressive, but not quite that into Eastern philosophy."
"You picked that up all on your own?"
"Life. The best teacher."
He had a comeback for every whine. "What are you saying?"
"Get all the facts before you jump off the conclusion cliff."
He was right, of course. For once, I didn't fight just to fight. Acceptance, like retreat, was often part of winning the war. It's just that
Takes you back, doesn't it?
everyone knew my story, but few thought beyond the sensational aspects. Squash surprised me with his insight.
Yeah. Maybe the girl has a better story. If she had that photo for as long as she says, she could have started looking years ago. She didn't. Makes me think there was a reason.
Her grandmother just died.
There you go. Try to see there might have been some good in all of this.
I raised one eyebrow, but didn't bother arguing the esoterics. Facts would show the truth, assuming we could uncover any.
But between you and me, if you want to kill Mona, based on past experience alone, we could make a strong case for justifiable homicide. You would make my career.
I'll give that some thought. You know how I like to help. Even though he was a lawyer, I was starting to like him a lot. Of course, it could be just that bad judgment, handsome man thing. Are you aware Mona is campaigning hard to get appointed to the Paradise Town Advisory Board?
How could I not know? She doesn't miss a soundbite. How's her act playing with the Clark County Commission?
My mother has a Don Quixote complex, a champion of the underdog. But a political office, more so an appointment, will be an uphill battle for a former prostitute and the wife of one of the most influential casino owners in town, which is too bad. She actually would be pretty good on the advisory board. When she was a lobbyist for the prostitution industry, she turned Carson City upside down. That got a smile out of both of us. Squash joined in my Greek chorus.
I admire her work educating hookers who want to get out. 201? They speak almost reverently about her.
That's probably pushing it a tad.
Your mother and I fight on the same side in that war. We need folks to challenge the status quo in government.
True. Just, could that monkey wrench not be my mother? Not right now. Maybe she could take a sabbatical? Neither one of us took that seriously. Mona carried a big stick and had a penchant for finding beehives. For her, pushing boundaries and testing limits was as Pavlovian as my need to solve problems.
This could force her hand.
Squash didn't seem to be bothered by that. Odd, since he'd just been singing her praises and all. I wouldn't bet against Mona's backbone. Once she plots a course, it's better to get out of the way, then trail behind to pick up the pieces when the whole thing implodes. Do you think the girl could be part of a political angle? To be honest, Mona's political aspirations seemed inconsequential, but politics was an ugly business. Vegas had a long and storied history of bloody power plays. Mona was vying for a spot on the Paradise Town Advisory Board, which sounded innocuous. But the money part of the strip, The part south of Sahara didn't lie in the city of Las Vegas, as most people assumed. No. As a result of a money power play back when the folks who ran Vegas were a bit less law-abiding, the power brokers put their money smack in the middle of Paradise, a loosely incorporated part of Clark County. And now, the Paradise Advisory Board made feast or famine decisions that impacted the most lucrative part of the Las Vegas Strip. That kind of power could attract the wrong kind of attention. While I envisioned men with baseball bats skulking through the night intent on doing harm to my mother, Squash remained curiously unaffected by the possibility.
We'll turn over rocks like always, and we'll see which snakes crawl out. Been in this business long enough not to rule out any possibility.
I leaned forward, which, given the tiny space, put me nose to nose with the lawyer. He smelled as good as he looked. What I'm telling you is subject to attorney-client privilege, right?
As long as you're not admitting to a future crime.
That's always a possibility, but I'd never admit to it.
Then our conversation exists only in this room. The press doesn't sniff around me anymore. I know this is hard to believe, but I can be nasty when provoked.
It's not you I'm worried about. What about the girl?
I'll keep her quiet, but I better get a move on.
He pushed his chair back, then came up short against the wall. He angled a look at me as if the jolt had closed a few synapses, and a question formed.
How come you came to get me and you didn't go with her? You could have just called.
I trust Romeo. He wouldn't cross the line with the kid. I'd overplayed my hand a bit with the young detective, but he'd kept pace. He knew what I wanted. I wanted to scare her a little, soften her up.
You think she's telling a whopper?
Squash pressed. What I think doesn't matter, and who the kid belongs to doesn't make a bit of difference in a murder investigation. Can we leave it there for now? If Mona gets caught in the crossfire, I'll run damage control, but that's the best I can do. At some point, truth comes calling. Squash nodded, then gave a low chuckle as if laughing at a private joke, although he didn't sound amused. What?
Nothing.
The girl is the key. I need you to get her out.
After she sweated for a while.
The hint of a grin lifted one corner of his mouth and sparkled in his eyes.
You do know this is a murder investigation.
My father always said, if he found his ass in a crack, you'd be his first dime. I felt the skin between my eyebrows wrinkle into a frown. Normally, I ignored that sort of thing. But lately, Mona had made it her mission to see that I didn't need Botox before my 30th birthday. With 30 firmly in my rear view, she'd clearly lost count of the years, but I didn't correct her. And I left the frown in place. How is it you became all tight with my father? Squash glanced at the clock.
Would you look at the time? I better put a hustle on.
He slurped the last of his huge espresso, and I could see the wheels turning.
You still got that in with Lovato?
Daniel Lovato was the district attorney. I'd done him several huge favors, one that kept him out of jail. Wouldn't have been pretty being incarcerated with all those angry men he'd helped put there. I can give it a shot. My leverage and Squash's magic had worked for Teddy. Could we be as lucky the second time around?
Has she been charged?
Squash peered into my mug.
Drink up.
No, at least not when Detective Romeo took her. He said she was being detained for questioning. I grabbed Squash's arm, spilling his coffee that he cradled in his hands. She's just a kid.
16?
He wiped the coffee off his forearm. How'd you know?
You told me.
He seemed sure. I was sure I hadn't. Well, as sure as I could be with my brains muddled and scrambled with emotion.
Well, in Nevada, kids who commit crimes like murder are treated as adults for the purpose of adjudication. That means custody, bail hearings, all that sort of thing.
My hope fled, riding a long sigh. Why couldn't I catch a break just once? Okay, I was whining. Tired beyond belief, and not seeing any significant rack time in my future, I was a bit pissy. So bite me. And since I was coming clean and all, breaks often broke my way. I hoped for a bit of magic this time, too. So, how should we attack this?
I'll go get the kid, scare her a bit, then see what I can do. That usually amounts to throwing my weight around and then being reduced to using my considerable charm.
He shot me a smile.
Buck up, O'Toole. You're looking positively down in the mouth, which is not at all like you. We got this.
I wasn't so sure, but lest I tempt the fates, I kept that tidbit to myself. And me?
I would say go get some sleep. You look like hell. In fact, you look like someone who just chased down 2 killers, rescued the world as we know it from the forces of evil, is jet-lagged beyond compare, and is trying to get a fancy hotel opened while trying to celebrate, or more precisely because it's you, ignore your birthday.
You've been reading the gossip column again.
One of the few sources of truth these days.
A sorry state. As I eased out of the tight space, my ego momentarily faltered. I look that bad, huh?
If you can't count on your friends.
He didn't even wince when I punched him in the arm. He was smart enough to let go of his coffee before I landed the blow, though. I need to go talk with my mother. Squash shook his head as he drained his mug.
Nope, not yet. Your mother and father will wait. As you said yourself, where this girl came from, who her people are, none of that matters right now. We need to get her legal troubles under control or she'll disappear inside the system. And when it spits her out the other side, if it spits her out, you won't recognize her.
I shut my mind to that possibility. Okay, that's fair. What do you want from me?
I want you to do that thing that you seem to have a knack for. Get to the crime scene, snoop around, talk to people, win them over, turn over a few stones, work your magic. I've never seen anyone better. Get me something to cast a shadow of doubt as to her culpability. That'll help me at least get her home detention with an ankle bracelet, and find out who the hell the dead guy is.
He was slathering so much butter they couldn't have caught me in a greased pig contest at the fair. But I wasn't above reveling in my feel-good moment. May I remind you she doesn't have a home?
Aren't you the one always taking in the strays? I'm sure you'll think of something.